to New York City with her refugee parents. She's the author of 3 books of poems, including Vivarium, as well as the forthcoming poetry collections, Special Delivery and The Future Will Call You Something Else. She's also published a postmodern poetry handbook, Windows and Doors, A Poet Reads Literary Theory, and she's been teaching in the Vermont College of Fine Arts MFA in Writing program since 1996 and at Westminster College since 1998. About her new book, Robin Hemley writes, Sajé's mix of intellectual chops and emotional candor creates an unsparing account of one smart and compassionate person's life. That this life becomes a conduit and critique of the last 40 or so years of political and social upheaval is an added and bracing benefit for the reader. Camille Dungy calls it a complex and full-hearted book. The King's English Bookshop and the Westminster Bookstore have or will have autographed copies if you'd like to order there. Tonight, Natasha will read several portions from her book. After each portion, we'll open the floor briefly for a question from me or from the audience. Let's save our applause until the end of the event. And with that, I'd like to welcome Natasha Sajé. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I thought I'd start by reading a segment about one of my waitressing jobs. This takes place in a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called 209 1/2, which was one of the first chic restaurants in Capitol Hill. And Ranjan's going to ask, we talked in advance what the, I have an echo, so I'm sorry, I have to leave for 1 second and can you turn that down? Sorry about that. So I have had many waitressing jobs, and this one it took 2 years from 1980 to 1982, and it overlaps a little with Charles and Diana's romance wedding, and one of the scenes takes place, describes that. So I thought I'd start there. The restaurant was the inverse of the larger culture. Gay waiters and cooks had an automatic pass, while straight men had to prove they weren't homophobic to get hired. Our straight bartender was an actor comfortable around gay men. The workspace was what theorist Michel Foucault calls a heterotopia, a compensatory place of otherness, valuable for its affirmation of difference and a way to escape repression. We developed a camaraderie with deep roots. I'm going to skip to one Saturday afternoon before Halloween. I walked into the restaurant, opened the kitchen door, and found Danny, the cold station cook, peeling cucumbers while dressed in a nun's habit. Fresh vegetal mist filled the air. Petite, fair, and delicate in his wire-rimmed glasses, Danny was a founder of the DC chapter of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. On his way to work, he said, he passed 2 women who did a double take on seeing him. Real nuns, he surmised, because often the only evidence that one is a nun, not just a dowdy academic, is a gold cross around the neck. Wow, I said, you make a great nun. Danny's habit featured a wimple, a headpiece that focused attention to his heart-shaped face, and floor-length black robes with a woolen belt and turned-back sleeves. He wore rubber-soled Oxfords, plus the gold cross. Were it not for the overkill, he could pass. How about a prayer? I asked. Danny put down the cucumber and the vegetable peeler, folded his plastic gloved hands together, and bowed his head. Heavenly Father, cease not to watch over us when we have attained ecstasy in the arms of a hunky guy. Be a protector of our expenses so as we dress ourselves in your honor. Supply what may be wanting to us through short-sightedness or sinful neglect. Make our scallops tender, our chocolate cake light. Guide our waitrons. He looked up for a second toward me, that they may become like Jesus, that they may persevere. Amen. Amen, I said, giggling. I'm going to stop there and let Ranjan ask a question.
Thank you, Natasha. So I do have a question at this point, but we would also like to welcome questions and comments from the reader. So if you do have a question or comment, feel free to put it in the chat. Natasha, the question that I have is, in another part of this chapter, you write, waiting tables is the art of knowing how to approach a couple who's bickering and so on. Have you learned anything about writing or teaching from waiting tables? You know, it seems like there are some similarities in knowing how to observe people or how to read a room, perhaps the performative aspect of addressing an audience. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I actually published an essay called Teaching for Tips in an academic journal called Liberal Education about, 18 years ago, after I'd been at Westminster for a few years. And the argument in that essay was that course evaluations force instructors to be like waiters and be obsequious to the clientele. But the difference is that in waiting tables, you'll do anything for the customer. You will. I remember once I brought a table that was bickering, a romantic couple who were having a bad night. I bought them 3 different entrees, and I didn't care because it wasn't my money, right? All I cared about was the tip. I did not have to tell them, you're wrong. These entrees are perfectly fine. The problem is you. But sometimes in the classroom, we can't bring them 3 different entrees, and we have to tell the truth and say, wait a minute, this is your problem. It's not the problem of the restaurant. So, I realized I thought you were going to ask the question about memory. So let me go back and read the Princess Di scene and talk about that all. So, and this also speaks to the last question you asked. We were quick, picking up verbal and nonverbal cues from each other and from guests. Who needs another drink? Now. We were more patient with our guests' moods and idiosyncrasies than we would be with those of anyone else. We loved our customers simply for being human, and we tried to make them love being in our hands. Agape with a dash of eros. To do that, we loved each other, along with all our snobberies and cutting insights. Gaydar exists in part because queer folk pay attention to detail, to the way that people conform or not to stereotypes for their own safety in seeking mates. We gossiped like nobody's business. We confirmed suspicions about a White House correspondent's bulimia by following her into the bathroom with its 2 unisex stalls. Thereafter, when her name was on the reservation list, we signaled by opening our mouths and pointing a finger down our throats. And then this takes place on the afternoon of, on the morning in England, afternoon for Washington, D.C. time, of Princess Di's wedding. Jason, who's the manager of the restaurant, the owner's son, used the occasion to anglicize the menu with clotted cream and potted shrimp. And someone brought in a TV, and the guys stood around it that a Saturday afternoon. That dress has 10,000 pearls. She took a risk with those bangs. My God, look at the carriage. Who cares, I said, setting tables, deliberately uninterested. She's not very bright. Really? A kindergarten teacher? Oh, honey, said Jim, she has to be a virgin. A doctor certified her. I rolled my eyes, but the men were glued to the screen. Maybe they yearned to be virgin princesses. My grumpiness and snobbery might have had something to do with how pretty she was, or with the general notion of monarchy. At least movie stars' fortunes are based on their work. Virginity is a state of inaction, of withholding. Why should it be praised? Could any of us then imagine that the royal marriage would end in divorce, that Charles was already long in love with another woman? Camilla was kept from the press, or a secret no journalist dared to broach. Although Charles gave himself away when asked if he was marrying for love, on the eve of his wedding, he answered, whatever love means. In a letter written 5 years after the royal wedding, he asked, how could I have got it all so wrong? Tyrone, my Jamaican-born husband, made me aware that during this wedding hoopla, Caribbean immigrants were rioting, Bristol, West Yorkshire, and Brixton. Deaths were rare in the UK because neither rioters nor police carried guns, yet inequities in housing and employment were as obvious as billy clubs, and they inflicted much longer lasting damage. Who could take in the figure of 20 million pounds of taxpayers' money spent on security for the wedding and not consider what else that money might do?
Thank you. That is such a timely piece to read. I've been watching the latest
The Crown.
season of The
Yeah.
Crown. We do have some questions in the chat, but I'm also wondering if it might be a better idea to leave them at the end.
Maybe. Yeah.
That might be a bit more seamless way to go about things. I do have a question about memory since you brought it up. I read your book, and one of the things that I was really fascinated by was I'm really struck by how vividly you describe events from the past. I was wondering if, can you maybe talk about how you use memories as material for the book?
Yeah.
Do you have a process for mining memories? Like, do you keep a journal, etc.? And how do you navigate around vague memories or merged memories or trivial memories? Or how do you, in general, trust your memories?
Thank you. Yeah, when you told me you were going to ask about memory, I was a little surprised because I thought that everybody, I think this is sort of a human thing. We all think that other people are like us. So I assumed that my memory was not unusual. And then so I did a little research, neurology research, and apparently I belong to a group that's identified as having superior autobiographical memory. Now, the really top tier of this group are those, a couple hundred people that can tell you what they were doing on July 3rd, 1969, if they were born then. I'm not in that tier. But what distinguishes this, this lower tier of which I am one, I think, is that we're obsessives. This gift, whatever you want, or blight, whatever you want to call it, is linked to OCD. So that people like me and Mark Doty, I just did a webinar with Mark Doty this morning, and apparently he's one too. So we obsessively go over what happens in our lives while it's happening, which cements the memory. And then going back to it is like returning to a movie. So in my head, I have movie scenes of my whole past. It became more vivid after I went to college. So childhood isn't filled the way my more recent memories are. But for instance, of those two pieces I read, I spliced together, absolutely. I came into the kitchen on a Saturday afternoon before Halloween, and Danny was peeling cucumbers and dressed in the full nun's habit. And we had the conversation about the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. But what I did for the purpose of the memoir was add Tad. So I there's another character in that scene that I didn't read. For the purpose of streamlining it, I spliced together that scene with the conversation that I had had with Tad about wearing drag, and men wearing drag. So in order for it to be artful, I combined things and, of course, eliminated things. I remember way more than I put in the book. I also cut out a lot of scenes based on whether they were going to serve my purpose of the argument of whatever chapter it was. So thank you for asking that. I never knew that my obsessive ruminating is part of this autobiographical memory. And if you're interested, people who have this are no smarter than other people, and they actually have no better memory for anything except their own lives. So those are the characteristics. So I think I'm going to write another memoir, because I realized, wow, I have this whole movie. I have movie after movie in my head of stuff that I can draw from.
Yeah, I personally, and maybe that may be one of the reasons why I gravitate towards fiction more, but I have a really hard time remembering events from the past. I think I'm better at remembering feelings and emotions, but I have a really hard time grasping at the quote unquote, the facts around the events, such as numbers and measurements and things like that. And so I drew some satisfaction in reading Janet Borroway's writing fiction book, which she also talks about creative nonfiction. And she seems to suggest that maybe sometimes it's more important to reach for the essential truth or the emotional truth of the event. And you can kind of like, put your own stamp on the periphery of those events in terms of, for example, it's maybe not that important to remember the color of the shirt that you were wearing 10 years ago. What's more important is to capture the feeling of that moment. And I take some satisfaction from that. But having said that, when I was reading your memoir and a lot of other books, I'm just struck by the specific details that you're able to conjure up. But it's interesting in the way you're talking about it. You still splice things up, and you still sort of do your creative art around that to create convey a story around those moments. So that's interesting. Do you want to go ahead and read another portion?
Yes. Let's see. So this actually goes back in time to my first waitressing job, which was in Switzerland. And it thinks back to a high school job that I had. So I'd had plenty of jobs, cleaning houses, secretarial work, cooking, but until that winter in Switzerland, I'd never had a job requiring me to bifurcate myself so strongly. I enjoyed my ability to charm guests and read their psyches. But the moment I left the energy of the dining room, I deflated. I was a life raft with the air let out. I kept reminding myself that the winter wouldn't last forever. American psychologist Angela Duckworth argues that grit gears someone for success. Her signs of grit, such as accountability and perseverance, are standard German behavior. My double consciousness resonated in other ways. The American Revolution, of course, was a bourgeois revolution, one whose progressive values I had absorbed, but in lockstep with the German value of reliability, where one does not dream of blowing off a responsibility or a rendezvous. Between my American optimism and my German determination, I didn't consider quitting. Years later, an American friend of mine would marry a wealthy man, so wealthy he'd never shop for his own clothes. Wardrobes were brought to his parents' New York apartment for him to choose from. His marriage to my middle-class friend required him, for the first time, to carry money. Each night, he threw his change into the trash. This appalled me, and I jokingly offered to come pick it out. But my friend said that when her husband wasn't looking, she did exactly this. Their marriage, containing such different values, was doomed. Perhaps those who have to face real conditions of life, to use Marx's criterion for the bourgeoisie, are happier. Where does one's sense of self come from, if not from something one has made or done or earned? Eventually, one must realize, Emerson writes, that no kernel of nourishing corn can come to a person but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. The statement applies to people who can and want to toil. Others happily consume corn without toiling. I hadn't yet identified my plot of ground, but I did toil. Good practice for the future.
All right, so maybe one more question from me, and we can pan the camera maybe to the audience at some point. But I did want to ask you about, you reference a wide range of writers and artists and thinkers in your book, and you drop these references pretty seamlessly, and they become a part of your voice and of who you are. So I'm wondering, did you model your book after any particular memoir? Or can you talk about the books and the writers whom you read to prepare for this book?
Yeah. I read hundreds of memoirs, even, I don't know, 500, and collections of essays. And the ones that I didn't like taught me as much as the ones that I did. I didn't like navel gazing. I think that always, and I tell my students this, when you're writing, you analyze yourself, but then you look up and you make a connection to the larger culture, to the ideology, to what's going on in the world. So, for instance, one book that I learned a lot from was Susan Faludi's In the Dark Room, which is a memoir of her father's transgender, his transformation into a woman in Hungary. And what I loved about that book was that she gave just enough family background for us to understand the relationship between the two, but she also gave a lot of cultural history and background to understand, for instance, Hungary and the U.S. And so the quotes, and I quote a lot, maybe too much, come from my desire not to be just a navel gazer. I thought by bringing in other voices, I could avoid that. And I must say, Google makes it easy, to put in the search box, quotes about whatever, and it gets your mind going. And then you can go on this search to find exactly, not so much what you were looking for, but something that takes you someplace you didn't know. So the other voices took me to new discoveries and new insights. For instance, when I started the book, I had in my head a quote that I've always remembered, and that is Horace said, "Souls change, skies change, souls don't. And then after I wrote the book, I realized that's so wrong. Skies change, but souls change as well. And then I went back and read more Horace, and I discovered that he even contradicted himself on that. He has a quote that I mentioned in the book about adversity bringing out the best in people and changing them. So even he realized that souls do change.
Yeah, the creative writing class that I'm teaching at the moment, fiction and creative nonfiction, we talk about this quite a lot because, you know, in memoir writing or creative nonfiction or personal narratives, we sometimes confuse honesty with confession or integrity with self-exposure. So the idea is to make it like a tell all, reveal all sort of a narrative. But I really like the idea of combining other voices into your voice to create this more complex, idea of voice and authorship. So with that, maybe we can go over to the chat because there are some questions. And Eileen, would you like to take over this point?
Thank you, Natasha. So the first question is from Georgie Donovan. I'm curious about the connection between food and performance that you're developing. Can you say more?
Yeah, well, I have a whole chapter called The Performance of Taste that argues that there's never a moment that we're not performing. And expertise, Americans tend to not accept education and expertise. I argue that training in anything causes us to be better than other people at doing something like cooking or writing, and that there's something in the American character that makes people not want to accept that and to say that we're all the same. Everybody's taste is as good as everybody else's. Anybody can do anything.
I'm wondering if you could connect that maybe to your use of the word snob, and then Julie Jensen's question, which is, what did you learn about social classes from working as a waitress?
Yeah. So the word snob used to mean the exact opposite of what it does now. So now it's somebody who pretends they're, has airs or pretends they're better than the social class that they inhabit. It used to refer to just students and carpenters, no, shoemakers' apprentices. So words change over the course of history. So the second half of that question, I learned so much from waiting on people. I think that having a service job, it should be a requirement for every young person somewhere in their lives, whether it's in a restaurant or in a store, somewhere where they have to be exposed to a broad segment of the population. And what I learned was that um, people's performances are not necessarily who they are. That sometimes people perform, and if you were watching The Crown, maybe you saw this in the Margaret Thatcher. I think she was performing someone that she thought she had to be, as opposed to someone more real. So people are rude. One thing I've noticed about, again, American attitudes is we try to make friends with our waiters or our servers, which is not the case in other parts of the world. that it's simply not done. When someone is in a service position, uh, they have bought into that. They don't expect to call you by your first name or have a conversation with you about anything. They are just there to help you have a good evening and order the best food that you desire. So so yeah, did that answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to be rude and actually ask you a follow-up question and not the next question on the list. You described this moment of traveling with Laura and arriving somewhere and wanting to go have a drink with the owner of the Airbnb. I wonder then, what is your relationship with food and service then? And what did that moment, that desire to wanting to connect with him in such a personal level, um how does that fit in this worldly view that you have of food and service?
Yeah, I think it's because traveling can be, even if you're traveling with someone, it can be really lonely because you're an outsider. So, and especially Airbnb gives us the feeling it's not quite like a hotel where people's roles are so clear. But when you rent an apartment via Airbnb and the host comes down and shows you how to work the air conditioning, you're sharing this same space, and this is the host's house. And often they treat you like a house guest, not a hotel guest. So that loneliness of being in a strange place, yet in a home, I remember, wishing, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a conversation? If I had this happened in Croatia, if we could make friends, which is unrealistic, but I think people feel that way.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to be fair and go to the next question. This one's also from Georgie Donovan. Is choosing memories like good translation? Res non verba supply the gist of an accurate impression, not the literal words. Should I
Hmm.
read that again? In
No,
choosing
no, I
memories,
got it. That's
okay.
great. Yes, I like that. I'll have to use that in the future. Choosing memories is actually like, yeah, choosing the right word. Absolutely. You search through your little Rolodex and find the one that will suit. And every chapter in my book is an argument that will support the argument.
Thank you. Next from Julie Jensen. Would you ever want to wait tables again or be a, a chef? If so, where?
Yeah. No, I don't think my body could take it. It's such hard work, being on your feet for that many hours and sometimes carrying heavy things and leaning over people. I ruined my back when I was in my 20s because of one waitressing job. I would never want to do it for, on that kind of scale. Yeah. Although it's lovely to be a host. MFK Fisher, the food writer, says that people are divided into hosts and guests. Um, Ones that love being hosts and ones that love being guests. I love being a host because I'm sort of a control freak. So, so that
If
I
you could host at any restaurant, where would you host?
hmm, wow. Well, I don't know. Not a hole in the wall. Not the food would have to be fabulous. That's the thing. It's really fun to be a host or a waiter when the food is good. It's horrible to do that when you know that what you're serving is inferior. So,
But that also taps into your control.
yes, it does.
Um,
Right.
this question's from Chris Lecluse. It seems like people are more relaxed about the distinction between fiction and nonfiction than they were even 10 years ago. How did you walk that line in writing your memoir? Did you feel beholden to a particular standard?
Um, I, I didn't feel like anything I was writing was fictional. A, because I have a good memory, and B, I checked what I wrote when there were other people involved. I showed them the chapters and made sure that I was being accurate. And I did research to make sure the dates and the details were right. So I didn't worry about that line. However, and I never considered writing autofiction, taking this one more step and pretending it was fiction to give me greater freedom. I kind of liked being held to a standard of fidelity and truthfulness. I didn't need the freedom of fiction. But I think you're right. I think you're right that those lines are blurring. Certainly with somebody like John DeGata, who will absolutely change details if they suit him, even if they're verifiably wrong. He has wrote a famous, I think it was in the New Yorker, published an essay about Nevada that then became a play because the fact checker for the New Yorker found fault with all the changes in DeGata's essay. So it is a controversy.
Before I move on to Catherine Kate's question, Chris Lecluse has a comment, very much on par with his persona. Since I know you dig etymology, you know host and guest come from the same word. Originally, they indicate both sides of a hospitable relationship.
Nice.
We wanted to respond to that.
Thank you, lovely.
So this is from Catherine Cates. Has writing a memoir reshaped the way you approach your other writing, such as poetry?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, that's so interesting. I can't double back and say that this book has changed anything. Maybe I'm just not aware of it right now. But I can't say what it is now, if it is anything. I think poems are way more artful and formal than this book is. This is a set of essays, each of which has an argument. There's, I think poems are maybe more fun to write.
I'm sure that you've heard that question now before in your other moments you presented this memoir. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that your poetic self seems so malleable to this different form of writing, or the suggestion that it's malleable to this form of writing?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, certainly writers change constantly. So I'm not the same poet that I was even 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 10 years ago or 40 years ago. So everything, every aspect of every writing, any genre is constantly in a state of change and flux.
I'll ask another question. I'm being very selfish. Was your imagined audience, or do you even imagine your audience with your other texts? Did you imagine an audience for this book? And if so, what does that audience look like?
Yes, I did. And I think they overlap. So I imagined many of y'all. I imagined people who like to read literature, who don't read junk, or if they do read junk, understand the difference between junk and stuff that's more literary. Someone who doesn't mind looking something up. I think that's true for the poems too. I really chafe against the idea that writers need to be accessible to everybody. You know, on some level, I'm also writing for someone like myself, and I'm willing to look stuff up. So, did that answer that? Yeah.
Absolutely. I have another question about memoir. Um, what were you tempted to gossip about other authors, other people that you've interacted with, especially through the poetry series? You've been doing this for quite a while.
That's the next memoir. So seriously, Mark Doty wrote or has answered in an interview. He said, if you've written one, you're going to write a second one. And I didn't understand what that really meant until the idea for a new book came to me sometime this summer. And it wasn't a book about academia and the poetry series. And it'll be a real challenge. It's going to be hard to do because gossip can't be just for its own sake. It has to be in the service of an argument. So did I answer you?
Yes,
Yes.
I think you're kinder than I am. I would just do gossip for gossip's sake, but
Well, I'm not sure it could be published. I mean, it's certainly fun, and I have great stories. Having had this job for 22 years, I can tell you stories. In fact, no, I'll save it for the book. I have a great one about Louise Gluck that some of you have already heard. But I'll save it for the book. And I don't think it's gossip because it would serve the argument, I think, about what it's like to be a host and be a host for people who are difficult.
ooh, can you say a little bit more about difficult? What do you mean by difficult? I know this is the next book, but that's a good.
Well, everybody has neuroses, and with some people that they get very close to psychosis. It's almost unbearable. They make their own lives very difficult. And yeah, many of the writers that I hosted, if I described what they did, you would say that's sick, right? It's manipulative, it's self-destructive. What are they doing? They need a psychiatrist.
Wow.
Hey everyone, sorry to interrupt. Sorry,
Time.
your co-host here. I'm wondering, just to mix things up, would it be a good idea for you to go back and read a portion, just to round things out?
Oh, well,
A
let's see
passage or
if I have. What I did was I excerpted things that I thought might be worth reading. I can end with
Do
one
you have an
chapter.
excerpt that speaks to you being difficult?
Yeah, but it's going to be too hard for me to find it,
Oh, fair.
because okay, here's my not that there aren't plenty examples in the book, but here's my eye problem. I'm very nearsighted, and yet I can't use reading glasses. And in order to read, I cannot read my book. I would have to block the camera to read my book from the book. So what I did is download and enlarge a Word version of the book. And then it's too hard to scroll through, 200 and some pages. So I just picked pieces that I thought might fit into tonight's reading. The last piece I have is comes from a chapter called Line Upon Line, and it's about the search for meaning in life. It's an argument against the word soulmate. And well, let's see. I don't know. No. Okay, I'll just read the argument against the word soulmate. No, wait a minute. So when I was 18 and home from college for Christmas, I had an appointment with a psychic palm reader. So I'll just read a couple of paragraphs about that. The 40-minute appointment with the psychic palm reader, a suburban housewife, took place in the airy kitchen of her colonial in Bergen County, New Jersey. She had come recommended by a friend with whom I shared not only a quest for self-knowledge, but a sense of unfulfillment. We yearned for a mademoiselle whirl of parties with boys professing endless love at the same time that we nurtured arcane passions and refused to smooth the edges of our intellects in order to attract boys. I was a slate on which crisscrossed two very different kinds of writing: the 70s dominant culture's block type and the often illegible cursive of my own oddities. I thought I could find out everything I needed to know. Well, I had secretly chosen the University of Virginia in part because the ratio of men to women, 8-1, favored my getting dates with men. After a fraternity party the first week of college, boys in docksiders and chinos drinking Kool-Aid laced with grain alcohol dropped off my list of interests. At the same time, in a first-year seminar called Sense and Nonsense in the Game of Reading, the brilliant and wacky professor sat cross-legged like a Buddha on the coffee table in the dorm's basement lounge, reciting Wallace Stevens' poem, The Idea of Order at Key West, or William Blake's The Garden of Love. Blake's poem describes a locked chapel built on a green and ends, priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires. It was a poem I too memorized. Blake's unconventional for his era ideas included sexual and racial equality, and his mysticism encouraged me to delve deeper into realms beyond here and now. Perhaps many teenagers are obsessed with divination at this time in their lives when anything seems possible, yet little can be attained. The word divination has as its root divus, Georgie, you'll have to correct me, godlike, because gods know what humans don't. I'll stop there. So we're past our advertised time. Should we just call it a night? I apologize for well, those of you who are here didn't have problems getting here, but some people didn't get the code from IT when they registered.
Sure, we can call it a night. Well, thank you, Natasha. This was wonderful. Not just to hear you read, but also talk about your book. Thank you all for coming in. Eileen, do you want to sign us off with a word or two?
Oh, and Miriam Greenberg is here. And I should tell you that the next reading in our series is February 1st. Miriam is Westminster's visiting writer for the spring. And she'll be reading Monday, February 1st at 7 p.m. And by then I should have the registration. I hope this won't happen again. The registration process will be snag free.
Oh, hello, everybody. Am I reading with Ahmad Jamal Johnson?
No. You're-
So close.
You're reading all by yourself. Because these are Zoom readings, I figured one person at a time would be fine.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you so much. I'm looking so forward to meeting you all to the extent that I can next semester.
Well, thank you, Natasha. I'm excited to finish the memoir and look for more of your difficult moments. And I'm not sure if you want to do a virtual clap or a real clap. I think we should go for a real clap. It'll be nice.
Unmute. Everybody can unmute themselves and clap. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
And go buy the book, everyone.
Definitely.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.